Well, and I think another important piece that you said without saying is that your goal is to be able to speak to other humans. That means it's not like, okay, writing essays or reading. I mean, a lot of those types of things can kind of come later. Like I've I'm working on learning how to read and write in Spanish right now. I live in Panama, but I think that my first goal was to be able to go to the restaurant and order my food or go to the bank and do my banking or go to the grocery store and like interact and make myself understood because, you know, reading and writing is actually a technology. I mean, that is a totally different set of skills than learning to converse with someone else. The other important point that you made is when I was a child, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. So they took me out of my normal program, my normal school program, and I never learned French. I never went to school for French. And they just told me, Mikhail, you have so many problems with English. Like, basically, we don't want to overload you, and languages are not your thing. Like, I got told that with my native language. And now what do I do for a living? I write and I speak for a living. So
similar to you, I had an issue when I was growing up. I had to go to speech therapy.
Wow.
I had great difficulty speaking English. And
yeah.
my brother, to this day, he teases me that my favorite show growing up was Star Trek because I couldn't pronounce my R's.
Sure.
So I, again, like yourself, would have been convinced that I am not naturally inclined to learning languages. But the thing is, when you start to step back from your own personal situation and really think about this logically, it doesn't make sense that an individual can be bad at languages. Even somebody with setbacks like speech impediment or whatever it is, because we are social animals. We need languages to survive. We have all evolved this skill, and I cannot think of a single person that I've interacted with who has sent me a message through my blog who I would say, do you know what? You are a hopeless case. You can't learn foreign languages. It just doesn't exist. Sure. There are people who do indeed have greater challenges to overcome, but absolutely everybody can do this. When you think about your ancestors, there was somebody who had to be bilingual at some stage. It's just the nature of coming from international countries or countries even in Europe, small countries are going to intermingle. So somebody had to speak multiple languages. So using the genetics excuse, I don't have the gene for learning languages, is nonsense. And when you think about it, most of the world speaks more than one language. You think of the population of India, you think of in China where they have to speak different dialects that are effectively as far apart as different European languages are. So most people are multilingual. And it's just a case of when in our isolated bubble of white Westerners, we tend to see only English speakers. And that's very unfortunate because that's not really how the world generally works. And once you see that, you see it's so much more normal and approachable. And it's fine when you throw yourself into it in a non-academic way. Because if you treat it academically, every mistake you make is a big red X on your exam paper that brings you closer to that fail grade. But when you're actually using it in the real world, every mistake is just you practicing. And it is a part of you communicating. And if you say something that is not perfectly grammatically correct, like me want go supermarket, it doesn't matter because the communication has succeeded. The other person understands what you mean. And if you can try to get the gist of the majority of what they say back to you, then you have used the language in a certain degree and you can expand upon that.
Makes sense to me. Well, while we're on this topic, let's talk about a couple of the other dirty dozen excuses that people tell themselves of why they can't learn a language. I know with a lot of my private clients, the majority of my private clients are 55, 60, 65, 70 years old. And they always tell me I'm too old. I'm 65 years old. I'm too old to learn a language. What would you say to something like that?
There are loads of examples to the contrary. So I've got my blog, I've got my YouTube channel. There's another guy in the language learning community, Steve Kaufman, who I believe is 80 now, and he is outputting videos of him learning new languages at that age.
Amazing.
And it's like, when you think about it, you're really comparing yourself to a child. Like, I think the question of, I'm too old to learn a language, that excuse doesn't really change if you're 20 or if you're 60. It's always thinking of, well, the window has passed because I didn't learn it when I was a child. But when I looked into this, I found there was research done at the University of Haifa that found that under the right circumstances, adults are actually better language learners than children. The question is those circumstances, because typically an adult will take a dusty old grammar book, we'll go to a classroom with a bunch of other people, and we'll keep our mouth shut while our teacher talks at us. Or nowadays we'll use apps that we're just kind of clicking into them and not actually interacting with the language in any meaningful way. And this is not what children do. Children play games in the language. Children have friends in the language. Children have that necessity to actually use that language, which pushes them much more forward than adults who are doing it kind of more casually. So maybe if we can emulate that sense of urgency in our lives, which is why I try to speak with an actual human, even if I can't travel to the country, I can get someone on a Zoom call. I can start the call, and as long as the rule is no English, I have that pressure that I need to communicate, and it forces me to get out of my comfort zone and expand on things. So that's kind of addressing the question of, why are children better learners? It's because of their approach. But like, ultimately, adults, there are so many examples. And if somebody does a search on YouTube, I have this thing called the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. If you do a search for that, you'll see a lot of people who go through my program upload videos of themselves in various stages of learning. And a lot of the people in my program are 50 and above, and they are successfully learning languages. It's not easy, and I'm not going to give any kind of pipe dream that I have the easy solution to learning a language. It is a pain. You have to feel like an idiot. This takes a lot. Like, the biggest learning curve is your ego. People think it's about the strategy and memorizing words, and to a certain degree, of course it is. But most of what you have to get over is letting go of your ego, because as an adult, we are used to communicating in a very deep way all our feelings and our philosophical beliefs, or whatever it may be, in our mother tongue. And it feels very limiting when we start a new language and we're suddenly asking where the bank is, and that's just so limiting compared to what we're used to. And so we'll give up, because we're like, well, that's a polar opposite to what I can do in my native tongue, so what's the point in even trying? And if you have the endurance to push through a period of time where it is difficult and you are not going to be able to communicate very deeply, you can get to the other side, and from that you can communicate just like everybody else. So there are so many examples of adults learning a language regardless of their age. And like I said, there's research that shows that it's much more about the approach than it is about when you were born.
No, it makes sense to me. I get, so I have, I got a couple of kids, and my daughter is 7 years old, and she speaks native level English, native level Spanish, and native level Mandarin Chinese. And we're working on Russian with her. And everybody, I bring my kids out for client dinners when it's appropriate and stuff. And everybody always says to me, oh, it's because she's a kid and they're little sponges and they just pick up everything. I push back on this. And actually, I'm curious your opinion, Benny. I can tell you from my daughter, first of all, we homeschool her. So she's in an environment where she's going to karate in Spanish. My wife is from mainland China. She speaks only Mandarin to her every day. We have 2 nannies who work for us, full-time nannies. They speak only Spanish. So she gets, one parent, one language type of things. But on top of that, my daughter at 7 years old doesn't have a full-time job. She's not have all these other responsibilities. So basically 14 hours a day are in 4 different languages split up. And so, and I truly believe that if I spent 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 5 years straight, trying to learn 3 additional languages, I'd be pretty awesome at those languages. I think that there's so much of it is time and in context and real situations. So I don't although I think that children are sponges and are very impressionable and pick up things, I think we also have to give credit where credit is due. And it's the amount of time and energy and effort that the kids can and in my case do put into the language that really shows the output of what they're able to do.